So let's go ahead and dive right into what's on your radar. One of the earliest sensing tools that I use via Miro to describe and ultimately organize, just frankly, what is on the purview of every one of the major stakeholders that I'm talking to, let alone the second and third tier stakeholders that I'm working with. As you can see from our consistent pattern, some of the step-by-step instructions are organized on the left-hand side, as is the example output. But in a nutshell, we use the radar experience in order to understand not only what is on the landscape in someone's environment, but ultimately how important is it? With the general intuitive feeling of the closer to the center, the more important or at least intense the feeling is about whatever is being described. You'll notice here we've provided a variety of methods of what's on your radar. That's because what's on your radar may be most impactful if it's taken over a series of time, because when you're using this with stakeholders, things like the environment or the technology, regulation, or the social implications that are surrounding them are going to evolve. And so what's on my radar today might be very different than the before times when I didn't actually have children, or I hadn't chosen a partner or decided to be married, or moved to the Northeast, or whatever the case might be. The end state of our what's on your radar can happen in a variety of formats, but one of the popular experiences we have is around what we see in our bottom left-hand side of this frame. In the bottom left-hand side of our frame, we see first and foremost a task. The task can be broad-reaching or hyper-specific, depending if you're using this in a corporate or more of an open-ended entrepreneurial opportunity gap-seeking mode. The task is all about the outcome that you're trying to generate. Below that is an area where you can label 4 quadrants of a radar diagram. In my example, the 4 quadrants I've chosen around the task of asking what ways limited mobility impacts organizations describe different types of key performance indicators or topics that every executive is trying to manage about growing a really valuable business with the best people in the healthiest environment. The 4 major dimensions that are present in and around this particular radar are attraction, retention, business goals, culture and communities, as well as a catch-all other bucket. This catch-all other bucket is something I frequently use because oftentimes I don't necessarily ideate, whether it's individually or a small group, all of the possibilities at once. And more often than not, we don't want to rule out and want to have a parking or sandlot for all the ideas that may not fit neatly into major drivers we're aware of today, metrics like attraction and retention, for future aspirations or metrics that will matter. After I have chosen and aligned with my 4 major drivers that I want to understand, I may want to go out and interview each individual user, dictated maybe by the color of their post-it or perhaps the stage or the radar diagram themselves that's on, what in fact is on their radar. So I'll ask them to ideate and ultimately put via post-it, what things relate to this idea of mobility and attraction and retention in and around the top left-hand quadrant that we see the indication on. We'll also want to make sure that we nudge and ultimately conversate around which post-it notes we believe are the most intense, significant, or strong, which will be closest to the center. We'll also see which ones have percolated to the outer bounds of our radar. Still present and in consideration, but maybe not as critical as the ones at the center. You might also see a what's on your radar presenting a problem, a task, or an objective at the top, and having individual roles or stakeholders be present around the perimeter of your circle. If I move into one of our blank templates here, what's on your radar group 1, we might see that you have a task or an objective that says, how do you make our product teams more efficient? And I've already listed in example format, tools, human capital, processes, and overall innovation. However, if we wanted to pose a challenge or a goal like how can we ship software quicker, we might actually have to put software developers, designers, cybersecurity experts, enterprise architects, salespeople, customers on the radar itself to decide what different elements are omnipresent in their thinking. The stronger the element that's present in their thinking, the closer it is to the center of the bullseye. When you're done, we now have a record or a passive way to document what was perceived as the biggest opportunity, challenge, threat or strength in a very obvious way in a time series or time-lapse series of these diagrams. So again, what's on your radar could be really early on in the process, or what's on your radar could be just when there's a new stakeholder that's introduced to the process or later on in the journey. I'll let you decide how to make most of the template and the pattern we've laid out. But as always, really excited to hear your feedback, creative implications, lesson learned about the industry, the product or service you represent. Thanks again for tuning in.